Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think we are ready to get started. Good afternoon, distinguished representatives of member states, colleagues from the UN, agencies and departments, NGOs, members of the press, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you all to this panel discussion, Life Under Siege, Starvation as a Weapon of War, on behalf of the Permanent Mission of Denmark and our co-host, the organization PAX. At the outset, I would also very much like to acknowledge and thank the many countries who have joined to co-sponsor the event and thereby support its important message. Thank you to the permanent missions of Belgium, Cyprus, the Czech Republic, Finland, France, Greece, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Qatar, Republic of Korea, Saudi Arabia, Slovakia, Spain, Sweden, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, and the United States of America. The focus of our gathering here today is the deliberate and cynical siege and starvation of civilians in Syria. This not only constitutes a violation of international humanitarian law, but it also affects the lives of innocent Syrian men, women and children in the most tragic and horrific way. In the Syrian conflict, starvation really has become a weapon of mass destruction. With this event today, Denmark and the co-organizers and co-sponsors condemn and call for the immediate cessation of the deliberate use of starvation as a weapon of war. We also wish to increase international efforts to stop the obstruction of delivery of life-saving aid to civilians by the Syrian authorities or any other party to the conflict, and to pursue the goal that all alleged violations of international human rights and humanitarian law are thoroughly and impartially investigated and the responsible parties held accountable. In a statement this morning, the Foreign Minister of Denmark, Martin Lidegaard, expressed his strong commitment to these efforts and said he was very pleased that so many member states of the UN have chosen to co-sponsor the event here today and thereby strengthen its message. We have a very interesting panel here today, so in the interest of time, I will go ahead and pass the floor to Alexandra Hinneke from PAX to introduce our distinguished panelists.
Thank you, Ambassador. And thanks to you all for making the time today to learn about a very difficult subject, life under siege, starvation as a weapon of war in Syria, which constitutes a violation of international humanitarian law. PAX has been working in Syria for more than 10 years to support non-violent civil actors, and we've been hearing horrific reports of violations of international humanitarian law. When our partners first started reporting that starvation was intentionally being used as a weapon of war, we immediately began to work to galvanize the international community to condemn and call for an immediate cessation of this practice, as well as all violations of international humanitarian law. Before I introduce the panelists, I want to take a moment to thank the Syrian Women's Network, which first promoted the idea to bring the voices of Syria here to the United Nations. I'd like to introduce you to our first panelist, Mr. Qusay Zakaria from Moadmia. Qusay is a civilian media activist of Palestinian origin who first brought the story of besieged Moadmia to the world. Although Qusay's remarks will focus on the issue of starvation as a weapon of war, I strongly encourage you to see his blog and learn more about his speaking tour describing his experience surviving a chemical weapons attack. Qusay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for coming here. My name is Qusay. I'm a media activist and civilian activist as well from Moadmia. just came here to the United States almost 3 months ago to share my testimony and give a first-hand account about the war crimes in Syria. Muaddamiyah is a very small town in the west suburbs of Damascus. It started participating with the uprising against the regime since the beginning of the Syrian revolution. The regime didn't hesitate to use all his weapons against the civilians of Muaddamiyah because Muaddamiyah is a very small but yet a strategical town for the regime to control, because it's right next to his most powerful military divisions, like the 4th Division, which is a military division run by Maher al-Assad, the brother of Bashar al-Assad, and it's also right next to Al-Mizza military air base, which is also the headquarters of the Air Force Intelligence, one of the most powerful intelligence branches the regime have. Since the beginning when the people of Muaddamiyah started participating with the demonstrations, the regime used all his weapons to stop people from demonstrating. It started with his mercenaries and sending car bombs to Muaddamiyah until he put the town under complete siege at the end of November 2012. The regime shut off all the basic supplies of life, starting with power and gas, food and medicine. Everything was forbidden to go to Muaddamiyah. Anybody who tried to come in or out from the town, they would have either get shot by the Assad snipers or worse, to get captured and tortured to death. I personally helped burying a lot of civilians who were trying to come in or out from Muaddamiyah. I always remind people about a guy called Abu Muhammad who was working in Damascus when the siege started, and he had his wife and daughter back in Muaddamiyah, and he was trying to get them medicine. His daughter, 7-year-old daughter, was suffering from heart problems, and when he tried to come back to the town, the regime caught him and tortured him to death and burned his body with acid. This is an example how the regime is, in a very brutal way, stopping any kind of aid or anybody who's trying to come to flee the town or come to bring any kind of assistance to the town. The regime also stopped the United Nations aid convoys to enter many times. So we only had simple food storage to survive on during the first couple of months of the siege. Some rice, some sugar, the kind of food that people keep in country houses. But all this small amounts of food ran out almost 5 months after the siege started. We only had olives and leaves of trees to survive on, to make weird kind of salad or soup, and just eat some olives that our town is very, very familiar with. This is all was apart from the regime's popular campaign, which he called it kneel to Assad or you will starve to death. In Arabic it means al-ju'a wal-ruku'. This is a picture of one of the Assad mercenaries at one of the checkpoints near Muaddamiyah, and they are bragging about their motto, this brutal campaign. Basically, most of the people who were suffered the most from this starvation tactic were women and children, and also the wounded civilians as well. This picture shows one of the children of Muaddamiyah who was suffering from the starvation. He died at the end of October 2013 because of the lack of food. This picture belongs to Rana Ubaid. She was only 18 months old when she died from malnutrition in Muaddamiyah. Believe it or not, her father used to own a grocery store, and his daughter just died because we didn't have any children's milk to give her. So imagine a guy who used to have a grocery store having his 18-month-old daughter starving to death without being able to get her any kind of food or children's milk to make her survive. The regime, after we managed to make some noise about the regime starvation weapon. The regime responded in making a maneuver at the end of October 2013 with the help of the notorious nun Agnes Mariam, who was working as a middleman in this process. They evacuated women and children, some older, some wounded civilians at the end of October 2013. And we were promised that they will be safe and nobody will get hurt. But what happened was most of the civilians, 4,500 of them, were detained at the Mizze military air base. A lot of people got executed, field executions. Women got raped again. They tortured children. Hundreds of them are still missing until these days. And it was the only option for these people at that time to go out of the town and just eat. I personally was escorting the people who were getting out from Muaddamiyah at the end of October, and I remember asking them, how could you risk your life this way to go outside through the regime and without knowing what will happen to you, but the obvious consequences will be either detention or death. Their simple answer was, we prefer to die on a full stomach than to die on an empty stomach. The Assad starvation weapon doesn't just destroy people's bodies, it destroys people's hopes and beliefs. You cannot come back home when you know that you have your children or your wife or your sister starving and you have nothing to do, you can't do anything for them or get them anything to eat. It destroys family bonds, the society bonds. It makes people become hopeless and helpless at the same time. At the end of 2013, the regime took advantage of the humanitarian crisis in Muaddamiyah, and especially after Storm Alexa hit the Middle East, Syria, and Muaddamiyah as well. It was a big snowstorm that hit the Middle East at the end of 2013. People were already starving to death, and they started freezing to death. So the regime sent us an offer for a so-called truce, which was more like a call for surrender. In returns of entering small shipments of aid, the regime asked us to hand over weapons, which is our only guarantee for safety, and raise the regime flag, hand over defected officers and soldiers, and assign a military commander to run things in the town. But the most important thing about this so-called truce was that we are still paying a lot of money, millions of Syrian pounds, to enter these small shipments of aid to Muaddamiyah, which was supposed to be free, coming from the United Nations or ICRC or other organizations. Recently, the regime put the town under complete siege again, almost 3 weeks ago, before the beginning of the elections. He forced people to stay at Muaddamiyah, make them starve again, and their only ticket out was to go to the regime voting camp that the regime put at the entrance of Muaddamiyah. You will go there, you will vote for Assad, and you will get some bread and some rice in returns. And this maneuver, the regime is doing it in most of the places that sign up for similar truces. I would just like to tell everybody who's here in this hall today that there is no words to describe the Assad war crimes in Syria. The regime didn't stop in using all the filthy tactics that we heard about in history, and maybe he invented a couple of more filthy tricks. And the situation inside of Syria is unbearable, and we urge everybody here in this hall and other friends of Syria to make serious actions to stop the humanitarian suffer in Syria. Thank you all for coming, and God bless you.
Thank you, Kusai, for that very personal testimony. Our next panelist is Neil Salmons, the Syria researcher for Amnesty International. Neil has been working on Syria for more than 10 years, and most recently he was the lead researcher on the Amnesty report, Squeezing the Life Out of Yarmouk, War Crimes Against Besieged Civilians. Neil?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the Mission of Denmark and to PUX and to all the co-sponsors of this event. So I would like to talk now quite a lot about Yarmouk camp, as well as sieges of other areas in Syria, including sieges by non-state and other opposition armed groups. I'll begin with some testimony which we were given from Sakba, which is one of the areas in besieged eastern Ghouta. Hospitals usually work on battery lights. Only in special cases do they use generators. There was one case of a cesarean birth that had to be carried out using only the light from cigarette lighters. As there is no anesthetic, the woman was given only a local anesthetic. Her screaming could be heard everywhere in the hospital. Sadly, that kind of suffering is reflected across Syria today, as we all know. But I'd like to take us back to Yarmouk. So, in September last year, the Syrian government forces tightened the siege on that part of southern Damascus, in which so many Palestinians as well as Syrians had lived side by side for many years. When we finished our report, which was the end of February, and I have a number of them down here, we collated in it information on 194 deaths of people who died because of starvation as the main cause, secondly due to lack of adequate medical care, and then another dozen or so were killed by snipers, several of those while foraging for food. From many of the people we spoke to inside Yarmouk, as well as people who had fled and told us what life was like there, NGOs, human rights activists, humanitarian agencies and others, the description of daily life was clearly appalling. So people were resorting to mixing some spices with water, to eating a particular green plant called birdfoot, which isn't really fit for human consumption. There were a number of cases of cats and dogs being eaten. And of course, if people were trying to go into the edges of Yarmouk to forage for whatever they could find, little roots, leaves, etc., they would risk being shot dead by snipers. Not only is it starvation directly, but it's an attack on the civilian infrastructure of that area. So medical facilities, which had already been attacked by the government forces, were repeatedly attacked. There was one place, essentially the Palestine Hospital, which is the only significant medical facility which just about keeps limping on, despite most of its staff having fled and being reduced to working on a tiny budget and skeletal scarf. They continued to receive people coming in through their mixture of medical concerns and injuries. There was a time, as we were close to going to print on this, that there was apparently steps being taken to lift the siege. The majority of the armed group members left Yarmouk, and we were all waiting for the Syrian authorities to lift the siege. And we actually hoped that this would become an obsolete report, perhaps only used for trying to seek accountability for those responsible in the future. But sadly, the government forces didn't lift the siege, and weeks later, the armed groups returned. In particular, this is Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. They too have harassed medical workers, and they clearly have a lot of blame at their door as well. But the overwhelming majority of the responsibility we place upon the doors of the Syrian authorities. Since then, sadly, the situation has continued to be very poor, even though UNRWA in particular has been allowed a number of very important aid deliveries. It says itself, though, that those deliveries only meet something like 25% of the minimum food needs of the population, and that's people who've already been undergoing a siege since December 2012. It was tightened in July 2013. We have at least another 70 deaths recorded since then. more or less the same rate as before, and yet largely because there has been that trickle of food, we have less people dying from starvation, but more people dying from a lack of medical care, because until now, no medical aid is allowed into Yarmouk, despite 2139 and all the rest of it. We find that although some hygiene kits were allowed, which is great, it's clearly not going to deal with a number of the concerns there. Water has been particularly badly hit recently, and there's often less than half an hour of water a day. People are increasingly resorting to pull up water from wells, if they can afford the electricity or the mazout to do so. But because there are the particles of sand and other things in the water, that people are suffering from kidney diseases and kidney stones and so on. We're told that there's an average of 50 cases a week going into the Palestine hospital for that. Now, I emphasize the information there just a little bit more because I would say, sadly, in the monthly reports of the Secretary General to 2139, the suffering of the people under siege I do not think has been adequately captured. So please, if you can, take away a copy of the Yarmouk report or read it online. See our briefing note on sieges in 8 areas across Syria, and we will, all being well, be issuing an update to that next week. I'll just highlight a couple of other places, aside from Ma'adhamiyya. Daraya, as you know, beside Ma'adhamiyya, continues to be hit repeatedly by Syrian government forces. Barrel bombs have been used to an incredible degree. More than 350 had reportedly been used as of a month or so ago. And about 7,000 people are left there, overwhelmingly civilian, and they seem to be almost forgotten. They don't seem to feature in discussions and media work and so on. And just one other area I'd highlight because it has less attention too is Kobani, or Ain al-Arab, which is in the kind of the central north of Syria. And that has been largely besieged by ISIS. And while it has Turkey to the north, it has had ISIS around 20 kilometers around it, restricting the access of food and humanitarian supplies in and out, and stopping people like a bus driver who was trying to bring in some food a few weeks ago, got detained, and you can read more about it in our briefing. So we need to keep an eye on what the non-state armed groups are doing as well. I'll finish with one more piece of testimony. This is from a gentleman in Duma, and he was commenting on how he saw people coping with daily life in general under siege. If you look at the people here, you will see that they are completely finished. They are tired and hungry. To be honest, I have no idea how people continue to live. They live like they are drunk or like they are zombies. They exist, but really they are just waiting to die. When people hear of someone who has died, they say, "Oh good, he will have bread in heaven." Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. The next panelist is Dr. Ammar Al-Dimashqi, who is the local partnership manager for the Assistance Coordination Unit. Before joining the Assistance Coordination Unit, he was working as a doctor in a suburb of Damascus, but now he's based in Gaziantep in Turkey, and he works with partners to run numerous projects in besieged areas.
Thank you, Alex, for the introduction. I want first to thank the mission of Denmark for this, to give us the opportunity to talk about the besieged area, and thanks to all the mission who co-sponsored this event. This map clears the besieged area. The most besieged area in Syria are in Damascus suburb. How you can see this area when the people are dying from starving are just far few meters from the center of Damascus city. In this area we have about 800,000 people surrounded by the Syrian Arab army, supported by militia from Lebanon and Iraq. these checkpoints who surrounded this besieged area prohibit the passing of any food or medical supplies, fuels, or any essential basic life. The siege started about 1 year ago and then became a complete siege 7 months ago. The siege caused a humanitarian disaster on all fields. It has led to a distinct lack of food and medical supplies, in addition to a high increase in prices. In this table, we can see the difference of prices of food and medicine supply before the sieges and after. For example, the packet of bread was before the siege cost 100 Syrian pounds, and now it's for about 1,500 Syrian pounds. Also, the fuel is become unavailable at all, and his price augment about 10 times in average. And when we saw that the price of packet of bread is about 1,500 Syrian pounds, it's not been that it's available, but when we can find it, it costs these prices. Of course, this lack of food and high prices caused a high number of malnutrition, and we documented until now more than 150 mortality due to starvation in this besieged area. The last cases was in 29/5/2014, from about last week. It a children, Rahaf Kaadan, about 17 months in Zamalka. She died due to lack of food and medical treatment. His father is arrested from 1 year. They are IDPs from Jobar to Zamalka. The health sector also been significantly affected by this siege. This military checkpoint prohibit the passing of any medical items or consumable, and this besieged area are daily shelling by cannons, missile, or airstrike. And this shelling cause complicated wounded. In these complicated cases, the war wounded usually need a complicated operational intervention. The wounded are not allowed to leave the besieged area for treatment until they are directly arrested by this checkpoint and killed directly. The Syrian forces attack in a consistent basis this medical center. The last case was in the day of the presidential election. This medical center in Zibdin was targeted from 2 days. Zibdin is in the eastern Ghouta. We can see here one chamber of this medical center. It's clear the dry sterilizer, the oxygen. This is the ambulance. In this airstrike, the manager of this medical center, Dr. Khaldoun Al-Wadi, was killed with 9 of his medical team. 3 from there were paramedics. And by the way, his wife is also a medical doctor, and he's arrested from 2 years from Syrian Arab Army because she was treated injury. The lack of fuel caused a very problem. The lack of power sources prohibit any the application of any project. Even the simple project like charitable kitchen in this area become complicated due to the lack of power sources. This lack of fuel and other power sources damaged the water field. So in addition to the difficulty of getting fuel, make it very difficult for people to get clean, fresh water. So the people now the well's water become the main supply in some areas, so many diseases have prevailed. We can see here some wells in this besieged area. And this is a water merchant and some kids trying to have water. All of these forced people to resort to alternative power sources. They depended mainly on lumber, which led to cutting of trees, which in turn significantly exhausted agricultural resources. And there is some photo of firewood merchants. And the inhabitants of this besieged area endeavored to obtain alternative natural power sources, and we tried to fund many projects in this regard, like extracting methane gas from organic waste or generating power from water turbines. But the output has been very limited and was not enough to operate even SU projects. We've been also concerned to support medical associations in manufacturing essential medical items that are no longer available because of the siege, and we supported many workshops that produce basic medical items like linen, chest drainage containers, blood bags, or hair IV fluids. We also tried to support agricultural projects, especially in the eastern countryside of Damascus, to obtain essential food items. Many agricultural projects have been implemented, like cultivation of corn, wheat, or vegetable, but we encountered many difficulties in this project, such as the procurement of seeds, fertilizer, or insecticides. But the main problem was procuring water for irrigation. In addition to the unavailability of fuel, the regime closed off the branch of Barada River that passed to eastern Ghouta and was usually utilized in irrigation of cultivated area. For that, we recommend an immediate lifting of the siege on all besieged area, irrespective of the responsible parties. The immediate application of Security Council Resolution 2139 that require the free flow of humanitarian assistance to all Syrian area in need. Now, after 3 months of this resolution, until now we have besieged area, and we have children and elderly persons dying from malnutrition. And until now, we don't have any cross-border operation from UN agency, and the cross-line operation become more and more less. It's essential to open humanitarian corridors to allow passage for food, medicine, fuel, and life essentials for besieged area, to allow the evacuation of the injured and anyone else who want to leave besieged area. We reclaim to reconnect electricity and water to besieged area. And we pressure relief organization and international agency to increase their focus and work being done on procuring the essential needs of those in besieged area. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amar. The fourth and final panelist this afternoon is Mr. Nidal Bitari, who is a former resident of Yarmouk camp. He's a co-founder of the Palestinian League for Human Rights in Syria. He left Yarmouk camp about a year and a half ago, but he remains in daily contact with Yarmouk camp residents. He now resides in Washington, D.C., where he works for the Syrian Expatriates Organization. Nidal?
Thank you so much for this invitation, and thank you for the panelists, and thank you, Nel, for this report about Yarmouk. It was well documented. Actually, to make it clear, Al Yarmouk camp is not just as people think that it's tents and people sitting outside. It's really it's the biggest camp for Palestinian refugees in the area. And there was before the conflict about between 800 and 1 million residents inside the camp. Only 150,000 of them are Palestinian refugees.
Palestinian refugees in Syria used to live in 12 camps, spread over all Syria and from Damascus to in south to the north in Aleppo. This is how the camp looks like before the conflict, and this is how is it now. About 40% of the camp was destroyed. Okay. About 147 persons were arrested and killed under torture, and actually their bodies did not deliver were not delivered to their families until now. The picture here you are seeing is for two peaceful activists, Khalid Bakrawi, who was the manager of Jafra Foundation, which was working on relieving Palestinians inside the camps, and the other one who is Hassan, who was an artist, and he was working on psychosocial support for children inside the camp. About 3,000 Palestinians were killed during the conflict over all Syria. About 50,000 of the residents of Yarmouk camp could left Syria could flee to Lebanon before closing the borders, and hundreds in Jordan, and hundreds in Turkey, and other hundreds in Egypt. It's very difficult for Palestinians to leave actually Syria because all the borders are closed around in neighboring countries. Jordan is refusing to receive Syrian Palestinians since the start of the revolution. Lebanon, about 2 weeks ago, closed the borders, and the Turkish government asking for visas, and also to Iraq it's very difficult to go there. So they are not only living in a siege inside the camp, they are living in a siege in Syria. They are not allowed to go to flee to survive in the neighboring countries. And since Palestinians are under the responsibility of UNRWA, which is its mission is limited to relief and working, so they don't have a protection from the international community as other refugees in this world. So like UNHCR have a protection section and protection mandate, and protection mandate. So, but it's not including Palestinians in it. So it's very difficult for Palestinians to leave the country, and also if they left the country, it's very difficult to be protected by the international community or the UN agencies. Talking about the siege inside Yarmouk, as Nell mentioned, it was started in December 2013, and so almost a year now. And the photo we are seeing here now is for people waiting their basket shares from which was disputed by UNRWA inside the camp. Actually, the regime closed completely the camp for more than 7 months, and nothing could enter the camp, no food, no medical assistance, and the only hospital which was running inside the camp was Palestine Hospital. The people or injured people died in it because the lack of the medical assistance inside the camp. And also to make it to be frankly and honestly, when the Free Syrian Army entered the camp, they took all the equipment from the 3 hospitals in this camp to the liberated areas. So from the beginning of siege, the camp was suffering the lack of the medical assistance. About 200 persons starved to death inside the camp. This picture of is for the first child who was died because of hunger inside the camp, and there are many other children starved to death, and many other civilians. Actually, almost all the people who were killed or died inside the camps are from civilians. About a week ago, the Syrian regime gave permission to Jafra Foundation to enter and other local organizations to enter about 10,000 baskets of food. It was before the starting of elections, but since 3 days. 3 days ago, the regime stopped entering the food and closed the gates again, and also cut off the supply of water on the camp. So it's not hunger now only; it's living without water too. How our people are facing this siege? Actually, it was very difficult for them to face this kind of siege which has lasted since 7 months without food, without any assistance. So, but one of things that they created is to grow some vegetables on the roofs of their houses, which is not shelled yet. And this is how they are living now, through what they are growing on the roofs of their houses. And also, despite all the kill and all the suffering, until now, some local organizations inside the camp are working with the children on psychosocial support and trying to minimize the trauma, which I think, honestly, will last for a long time. I don't actually now talk a lot about Al Yarmouk camp, and now, after 3 years of the conflict in Syria, about 40% of the country had been destroyed. 10 million are either internal displaced or refugees in neighboring countries. It means that they are half the population, the Syrian population. About 200,000 were killed in 3 years. Let's imagine if this conflict lasted another 3 years. It means that the rest of the country will be destroyed. Other 10 million, which means that the rest of the Syrian population will leave the country. Other 200,000 of them will be killed in this conflict. So I think it's time now to start talking about peace building inside Syria, about starting initiatives to stop this bloodshed. And depending on that, people of Yarmouk camp yesterday night. The figures of Al Yarmouk camp, local civil society organizations, and the local council, and also some of the battalions of the Free Syrian Army and other armed groups sent a letter with me to this forum, asking UN to support them in holding a truce with the regime, because they can't bear anymore any suffering and the suffering anymore. So I'll put this letter in the hands of the Danish delegation, which is hosting and prepared this panel, and hope they can help us to send it to the UN representatives here. And to start and act and put it in action to see how we can negotiate with the regime and to end the suffering of the camp. Actually, ending the suffering of the camp is not just to lift the siege. Ending the suffering of Palestinian camps in Syria means that we are saving the lives of 500,000 Palestinians are inside Syria. And to keep them to keep them in safe, as all of them are, almost all of them are not allowed to go out of Syria to the neighboring countries. And actually, this is what this is the most important thing I'm emphasizing, that that we should start and to put this initiative in action. And kindly I'll ask the Danish mission here to help us with it. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Nidal, and thanks to all of the panelists for not speaking so long, because they all have so much to say and they really cut their remarks short. But we wanted to make sure that there was time for questions from you, the audience. So now we're going to open up the floor to questions, and I just ask you to please identify yourself, try and keep your questions short, and we'll take 3 at a time. Is there anybody who'd like to start? The representative from France.
Jean-Noël Bonnieux from the French mission. I'd like to thank the co-organizers for giving us the opportunity to hear these testimonies, and thank the speakers for giving us so vivid, telling, and actually horrendous accounts of what's happening in the besieged areas in Syria. My question will focus on what happened in Muadamiyeh and the old city of Homs in the past weeks. There has been some evacuations and local ceasefires that are praised by the regime, the Syrian regime, as a possible outcome and a solution for the Syrian conflict. Our analysis, as even though the outcome is good because it's actually probably contributed to end the siege in some areas, that this is actually part of a starve and surrender strategy of the regime, and that we shouldn't necessarily encourage the replication of what happened in Homs and Muadamiyeh. But I would be really interested in hearing the speakers elaborate a little bit on this question. And if I may ask a second question, which is somehow linked to it, we have concerns about what happened to the evacuees after the evacuation. And I would like to ask the panelists to elaborate a little bit on whether the evacuation happening under these circumstances is actually the end of the ordeal for the people who were besieged, or is it just the start of a new unknown path for them, which can, and we are actually worried to what happened to the people who were transferred to the Al-Andalus detention facility and then subsequently in some other unknown locations. And if you could elaborate a little bit on this, I would be really interested. Thank you very much.
The representative from the Syrian opposition.
Thank you so much for the mission of Denmark for hosting this event, for PAX, France, UAE, all of the co-sponsors, the media. And maybe I'd like to address the point raised by my colleague Jean-Noël from France, but I'd like to make 3 quick points before I do so. We are talking here about another crime against humanity. This is the 4th event we organized to kind of present to you, members of the UN, what's happening inside, beyond the stories you might hear in the news, by bringing first-hand witnesses to tell again about the starvation as a weapon of war used by the regime. I think the first point I'd like to emphasize, this is not a catastrophe caused by natural disaster. It's a man-made disaster. There is a clear cause of this, and we all know it. And there is an international plan to end this catastrophe. There is an agreement that UN Security Council Resolution 2139 is a good basis to end this humanitarian disaster. I think what's required is an implementation of this resolution, especially the 3 elements of it. That is the need to lift the siege, to end the human rights and international humanitarian laws violations, and to allow unhindered and rapid access, including cross-border, for those international humanitarian agencies. But I think what's important as well, and this is maybe address some of the points raised by my colleague, to know that there must be a political transition, must be a political solution, because this is a political cause crisis. It's not a humanitarian disaster, as I said. And the basis of that solution is still valid. And I'm not here referring to the surreal election, which actually I heard the North Korean observers said that it was free and fair elections. No, I'm talking here about the Geneva Communique, which constitutes a good base for a political solution. But in order for that to happen, we need sustained pressure on this regime and on its allies and those countries which providing coverage for this regime to continue to carry out siege, continues to use chemical weapons, the chlorine gas, continues to use barrel bombing, continues to kill political prisoners under torture. All of these are crimes against humanity. I think it's the responsibility of everyone here to defend those values of humanity and, in fact, act to provide that kind of sustained pressure on the regime in order to end these and other atrocities and put the country on a path of a political transition. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take one more question and then go to the panelists. And I think the representative of Saudi Arabia would like to speak.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the panelists for their clear and painful presentations. 2 days ago, I participated in reading out the names of 100,000 people, more than 100,000 people, who have been killed in the Syrian conflict over the past 2 years, 3 years. Behind each of these names, there are human beings, or there were human beings. There were families who have been destroyed by the regime in this conflict. Each name has a story behind it. It's not only a name in space that we are reciting. Today we have seen pictures of children who are dying of hunger. As late as 1 week ago, Rahaf died of hunger. These are children of 1 year old, few months old, and so on. Each one of you has a child or a grandchild or a nephew or a son or a sister or a brother who could have been that child. And you only need to imagine how would it feel if, God forbid, one of your own was subjected to this kind of terror and crime. These pictures are for human beings. They are for lives, and we need to recognize that. And just a couple of weeks ago, a resolution that was intended to bring those responsible for these crimes to justice, to hold them accountable, was vetoed by certain powers. Shame on them. Shame on them for stopping justice from taking its course in what is clearly someone didn't like what I said. Shame on them for not bringing those responsible to account. Shame on all the powers who are not providing as much support as they can to the Syrian people to be able to face this kind of horror. Shame on all of us to allow our fellows in humanity to be eating leaves and going through the suffering that we have just heard. It is amazing that as late as 1 week ago, we have children dying from starvation It is amazing that as late as 2 days ago, we have hospitals destroyed, ambulance cars destroyed, doctors killed, rivers closed from reaching certain areas. This calls for all of us to go to work, to revive the actions that need to be revived. We have a United Nations resolution 2139 that said that if the siege was not lifted, if access was not given for humanitarian relief to reach these areas, that the Security Council would take action again and would take the necessary steps to ensure that that is the case. It is our joint responsibility. It is our collective responsibility. It is the responsibility of those who have the honor and the privilege and the responsibility of holding a Security Council seat to make sure that what was said in that resolution is actually implemented. If we don't do that, then we are simply giving a license to people throughout the world, or to tyrants and despots throughout the world, to do whatever they want with immunity and without accountability. Thank you, Qusay. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Ammar. Thank you, Nidal, for bringing the suffering of the people to us. We are lucky that you are alive and are able to come and tell us these things. But there are 100,000 people, others, who are not able to make it, 200,000 maybe, who were not able to make it, and whose voice has disappeared forever. It's time to end this massacre that is going on. It is time to reach out for a political solution. It is time for the international community to enforce its will and to stop this genocide that is going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And maybe we can take one more, the representative of the Czech Republic, if you'd like to speak.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like really to express my admiration to the panelists and thank them very much for sharing with us their personal experiences. I can imagine how difficult is it for you to be here with us. And it's very important that you remind everyone, not only us sitting here in this room, but the others, about really immense human suffering of more than 250,000 people. It's really terrible what is happening in Syria today. I would like very much to thank, of course, to the mission of Denmark for organizing this event, and we are really proud to be co-sponsors of it. It's very important because the starvation of civilians as a way of combat is not only a violation of Article 14 of Protocol to Geneva Conventions and non-compliance with the Resolution 2139, but what is it? It's something what we cannot even imagine sitting here around, how the people are suffering, and I think it's very important to speak about it. We call the Security Council to take further measures to ensure the implementation of 2139. And I would love to have a question to the panelists, if I may. You were speaking about the children, and the ambassador spoke about the children, and about the very special suffering of the families, seeing small children dying and be really very hungry and under siege. Could we do something? Is there will of the families to send at least the kids out? How is the everyday life? Could the international community make some special steps at least to help to the kids and maybe other very special communities which would like to go out from the complicated regions? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll ask the panelists to respond to those questions, and then we'll move on to a few more people. So the first one about the Homs situation, good or bad example, and second is what happens to the evacuees afterwards. I think, Kusaya, maybe you want to take a stab? All right.
First of all, like I said earlier, the regime is making this well-studied plan, which is the starvation weapon. It starts with putting the towns under complete siege, cutting off all the basic supplies of life, the bombing, the shelling, destroy what's left of the understructure, making the civilians starve to death, make them so helpless and hopeless to settle down with anything that can just get them some bread to eat at the end of the day. What happened in Homs was another example for the exact same scenario that happened in Muaddamiyah. The evacuation, what happened is a big shame on the international community, on everybody who left. Millions of people, especially in Homs, where hundreds of thousands of people were under complete siege, suffered all that, and eventually they were forced to leave. And the regime is working on changing the demographic structure of some of the areas, especially in important areas like Homs, and unfortunately the regime succeeded. So I think it's a very, very, very bad example what happened in Homs. When it comes about the second part of the question, what happened with the people who were evacuated, like I mentioned earlier, most of them were taken to the Mezza military air base, which is also the headquarters of the Air Force Intelligence, run by Jamil Hassan. He's one of the most powerful intelligent officers in the Assad regime. Most of them were detained for months, and a lot of people were killed in field executions. We had our sources inside of the Mezza military air base who told us that. Women got raped again. The regime was trying to collect as much information as they can during the interrogation. Recently, during the efforts of the so-called truce, the regime started handing over some of the dead bodies of people who were tortured to death and were evacuated on October 2013. Even some of the dead bodies that the regime sent back to Muaddamiyah belongs to people who were detained after a truce was started in Muaddamiyah. And like Neil said earlier, Muaddamiyah is not the only example about what's going on in Syria. We have Daraya, we have most of south of Damascus and Damascus suburbs as well, eastern Ghouta. The regime shelling and bombardment is also a part of the starvation weapon, the tactic, because it's destroying what's left of the understructure. 3 days ago in Douma, the regime bombed the last field hospital that people in Douma have. They killed 8 doctors. These 8 doctors were responsible about treating over 25,000 civilians who are suffering from injuries on a daily basis.
Thanks, and I think Neil may have some points to add on Homs.
Yeah, to be fair, I think there still needs to be a lot of work done into looking at these local truces, which sound quite nice, and I'm sure most would agree that if people stop fighting in an area, that's a good thing, that less people are being killed by the crippling siege and by associated fighting. As you can imagine, for Amnesty, we're not going to comment too much on political processes, but we can talk about abuses carried out in the context of sieges and what happens after them. It appears that, well, it's clear that during the siege of Homs, it's one of the most crippling which took place in the country, where a small and small and small amount were being devastated by the government's forces and the complete restriction of anything coming in or out. And it does not look as if that was a deal made in a fair way. It was essentially something closer to a military surrender, and people then were able to eat to some extent after that. We need to look at justice and accountability. So if you're going to bring a siege situation to an end, we need to look at accountability mechanisms. So those individuals who were responsible for ordering the siege and for the use of indiscriminate weaponry, the targeting of civilians, the arrest, detention, torture, extrajudicial execution, it seems in some cases, of individuals need to be brought to account as well. We also see, I mean, as Qusay mentioned, in Mardamiya and to an extent in Yarmouk, when conditions appear to have been met for some kind of truce, the government forces continue to perpetuate the siege. I mean, Mardamiya is still under siege, despite the truce. The evacuees from Homs, and we might say that those who left in the May agreement were allowed to leave, mostly freely, whereas those who had left previously, particularly in February, many of those remained detained. So around 200 are held at the Al-Andalus school, as I'm sure you're aware. And while we do not have accounts of people there inside it being subjected to torture and ill treatment, we do hear a lot about the people there living in a state of very high anxiety because they have no idea what's going to happen to them. They have told us, we can come and be taken at any time from here, and they can tell us about individuals who have been taken from there. They don't know to where, and they've not been seen of again. They've told us of a number of individuals and where they believe they've been taken, and as far as we're aware, those people are not being held in any kind of just way with adequate safeguards of visits and proper charges and all the rest of it. It appears that those people who are held at Andalus at the moment are arbitrarily detained. Many of them have been there 3 months or more without charge, without knowing what charges may be brought against them, and they're at risk of enforced disappearance. So we would strongly urge yourselves and the Syrian authorities to ensure that those people are released immediately unless a clearly criminal charge is to be brought against them very promptly, and those people are brought to a fair trial before a civilian court without recourse to the death penalty. That may be a slightly naive request, but that's what should be happening in the context there.
Sure, thanks. Do you want to add something, Dr. Ahmad?
Yes, I just want to make one statement that open of humanitarian access should done without any political or military benefit. What the regime do now is use the starvation as a weapon. And he said to the besieged area, I do food versus hostages. Such was happened in Homs. He evacuated Iranian combatant hostages from FSA versus food, and that's what happened in South Damascus, and now try the regime to do in Eastern Ghouta. The food versus the hostages, the weapons, it's not acceptable at all. The food should not be a weapon for political or military benefit.
Nidal, you want to add something?
Maybe the truce is not the best solution in the besieged areas, but what we can do, the international community since the start of the Syrian revolution didn't do anything actually to save these people. I will talk a little bit about a small experience with working with refugees. When we are talking about the Iraqi refugees, we saw during the Iraqi conflict like a very regular steps that the UNHCR, for example, started to register refugees from the first time, from the first day of their fleeing from Iraq, and then they started to in the other step of housing them and then relieving them, etc. In the Syrian conflict, they didn't start registering refugees. They started registering refugees after a year and a half. When UNHCR, since like 6 months, was talking about 500 refugees in Lebanon, the right number or the true was it was about 1,200,000 refugees, Syrian refugees, are in Lebanon, living in Lebanon. So it's not only the regime who is responsible. Of course, it's fact and it's true and it's real that the regime is bombing and killing and etc. But people, Syrian people, really feel that they are orphaned. All the international community is leaving them alone. the international community, I believe that the internet doesn't do the best to save the lives of Syrians. So that the truces now are required just to save the rest of the lives of Syrians in Syria. And I'll talk a little bit about just about Palestinians. Since Palestinians have the UN Resolution 194, which the right to return. I mean, since 60 years, the international community is trying to implement this solution, and Israel is refusing. And now, after every 10 years, we have a new disaster with Palestinians, starting from the civil war in Lebanon, and then in Iraq, and then in Kuwait, and then in Libya, and today in Syria. What the international community did. If the international community will keep watching just these disasters happening and people dying and just running after the human rights, we know and we believe that the road of the human rights is very long, and it's all in the context of the Syrian conflict. The human rights laws and also the human aid are all political. So that I believe that going through truces in these areas I think it's really will not solve all the problem, but it will save more lives. So that the people of Yarmouk are sent this letter. You can't imagine how people in Yarmouk are living, despite all the siege and despite all the killing. They are singing, and they are. I don't know if you saw like the pianist of Yarmouk who is singing and within all or among all this destruction inside Yarmouk. People are really want to live. They don't want to die. And for Palestinians in particular, the reason of why Palestinians are refugees is Israel. And the reason why they are until now dying, they did in Lebanon and in Iraq and in Kuwait and now in Syria, is Israel, because Israel made us refugees. And so that people in Yarmouk, they want to be neutral, and they want this truce just to keep their struggling to achieve their right to return to Palestine. Thank you.
All right, we have a very limited amount of time left, so if there's anyone else, I think the representative of Iceland wanted to say a word.
Yes, thank you very much. No, I really just wanted to thank the Danish mission for organizing this meeting, and to all of you for giving us your testimonies. And it is really important to put faces to the suffering, and that is what you have done here today. And it is hard for all of us, and I think those of us who have spent time in Damascus, to imagine that people are actually dying from hunger in the middle of Damascus. It is unimaginable. And I think what it is just, I really just wanted to thank you for coming here and giving us sort of reality in the face, and also for calling attention to the special situation of Palestine refugees. It is important to call that to our attention when we talk about the situation in Syria, that their plight is still unresolved. And we will certainly study the letter when it comes through the Danish mission to all of us. And just finally, I really just want to say here that there are UN agencies that are really doing everything they can, like OCHA and the UNHCR and UNRWA, to help people on the ground. It is the political side of the House that has not been living up to expectations. And we really hope that we will see something coming from the Security Council on the issue in the near future. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. The representative from Luxembourg.
Yes, Thank you very much. Also very shortly and actually briefly, and I think the Ambassador of Iceland has said quite a bit what I wanted to say. I really wanted to thank Denmark and PAX for organizing this event, and it's an honor for us to co-sponsor, because I think it is really important to draw attention to the stark reality of life under siege, the use of starvation as a weapon of war. And I think it is important also that over the last week we had several events also on the use of barrel bombing. We had discussions about the Seige report of the use of torture. And it is important to put, like my colleagues in the West of Iceland was saying, also to put faces to this suffering, because and to stay aware that beyond the figures which we are dealing with and which are going up, this is, we are speaking about human beings. And I just wanted to say, because I felt a little bit also my colleague from Saudi Arabia was looking my way. As most of you know, Luxembourg, together with Australia and Jordan, we are the causes of Resolution 2139, and we take very seriously what is said in Resolution 2139 in Operative 17, that in case of non-compliance, the Security Council explicitly intend to take further steps, and we are actively working on this. We would have loved that we wouldn't find ourselves in this situation, because it would have meant that the demands in 2139 would have been heeded by the parties. But unfortunately, this is not the case, and especially and in particular not by the Syrian authorities. And not only has the situation not improved, it has deteriorated over the last 3 months. And we are discussing very actively, including also, again, like we did before, with all the humanitarian actors, what concretely could be done. Because I think we should not forget, again, the aim has to be how can we get humanitarian assistance to all the people in need. This is the aim of the resolutions, and to try to alleviate at least somewhat the suffering of the Syrian people. We know that unfortunately the situation will continue to deteriorate in the absence of a political solution, but we have to try in the meantime to really at least help somewhat, as I said, alleviate the suffering. We are working on the issues, especially of access, looking at how could one get cross-border access. We have the figures from OCHA where one could reach, how to reach, hopefully, people in hard-to-reach areas maximum. So we are looking into this very actively in this respect, and we certainly will not try to do our best to help alleviate. I had perhaps just one question, a little bit about also Aleppo. If perhaps also to hear your views, what is your feeling where situation will go in Aleppo? Is Aleppo going to be the next Homs? We have seen this intensified barrel bombing campaigns over the last months in this respect. And again, with all due respect, we certainly know that on the truth is it's a difficult situation to be in. If you are starving, if you see your children are dying in this respect. But I must say we share quite a bit the feeling also of the French delegation and quite others that the deal on Homs, the truce on Homs, this was military surrender, getting people to surrender after using starvation. And while in the Resolution 2139 we also call and we stress the need of having concluding humanitarian pauses and also for local ceasefires, but it's very clearly linked to ceasefires in order to get humanitarian assistance in and not, starving people into surrender. Thank you.
Thank you. We just have a few minutes left. If there's anyone else that wants to... Yes, please.
Me. Thank you. I am from the Republic of Korea. I would like to thank the Danish mission for organizing this event, and the Republic of Korea is happy to co-sponsor this event as well. I also thank all the panels for their briefings, and especially want to thank the survivors of the Syrian crisis for having survived and are giving this testimony, vivid testimonies to us, and we ask them to keep on doing this for the cause of this, to save the Syrian people from the crisis until there's a resolution to the crisis. And with regard to the letter from Yarmouk, very much touched by their sincere appeal to ask for the intervention of the international community. And I don't know whether the Danish mission or this group would be replying that jointly, but anyhow, my message would be that as a country that has a seat in the Security Council, I don't know about others, but I sit here with a little bit of embarrassment on the non-compliance of 2139. It's very easy to lose hope for us as well, just looking at the reality, but would like to send the message that not to lose hope. Of course, they could have lost hope already. They forgot the word, what the hope would mean, but I think now I think they should not lose hope, and as long as we are in the seat, we will not lose sight of what's happening in Syria. And then my next message would be an appeal to who are sitting in this room, who have influence in the region, and to the parties in Syria. The Syrian crisis has been like the Mobius strip of the Greek mythology. We can approach that through a political solution, humanitarian solution, by lifting the siege immediately or bringing access immediately. There should be, we just have to cut the strip to really resolve this, and I think that the only way is to stop the flow of weapons into Syria. Be it, this could be a very naive approach, but I think that's the core of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we've run out of time, so I want to ask the panelists if they had one last word. Maybe Kusai, you want to say one more thing?
Again, I want to thank each and everybody who came here to participate in this event. What I'd like to say is I'm a guy who was born and lived all his life in Syria. Like I told you, I just came here to the States almost 3 months ago. I've seen everything since day one. The problem is very simple, it's very clear. We have an entire population that rose up against a dictator who didn't hesitate to use all the weapons on this planet, including chemical weapons and also the starvation weapon that we are talking about today, to stop the simple demands of his people in freedom and dignity, who re-elected himself again yesterday for another 7 years. When you have cancer, you cannot solve the problem of cancer by just sending bandages. You need to operate to take the cancer out. The Assad regime is cancer. He's killing each and every thing that stands for life in Syria. When it comes about solving the problem, you cannot force Bashar al-Assad to allow cross-border aid delivery without having consequences. And we all saw that all the efforts that we are trying to do in the Security Council to have a resolution that allows ICC to start investigations and war crimes in Syria was stopped by the Russian and the Chinese veto again. I urge each and every man in this room and everywhere to start looking for new solutions outside of the Security Council and the United Nations that show that it's helpless against the Russian and the Chinese veto. Everybody says that time is money, but in Syria it's always, when it comes about time, it's just more blood, more innocent blood shed by the regime and Al-Qaeda in the same time. Thank you so much. God bless you, and free Syria.
Thank you, Kusai, and thanks to everyone for coming this afternoon. Oh, sorry, Neil, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add just a couple of other reflections on starvation which haven't come up during this meeting so far, which is to think of just not those who are starving in besieged areas, but also those who are starving in detention centres. You'll recall the work of the defected military photographer who went under the name of Seige, where 11,000 or so pictures came out. 50-odd thousand pictures came out, 11,000 people believed to have died under torture in only 3 branches of the Syrian authorities' control, and that a very large number of those were emaciated. So one thing about the detention centres also for starvation, and then when we look at the hard-to-reach areas and those 9.5 million, say, people who are in need of humanitarian assistance, we know that the majority of those, according to, I think, everyone's figures, more than half of those people at least are in opposition-held areas. And yet the information coming through the humanitarian agencies is that the vast majority of aid is going to government-held areas. It's something like 90% of the food goes to government-held areas, although I think the ratios are slightly less if we talked of other figures, other items, non-food items, and water. That is clearly not fair. More clearly needs to be done, and you need to look at the, but I'm sure you are, sounds perhaps wrong, you need to be done. It needs to be looked at how a much fairer distribution of those resources can be put across the country, and to keep an eye on those in power who are able to influence the distribution of humanitarian aid so as to encourage people to move from one area into another. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, and Dr. Amr, one quick word.
I just want to say at the end of this event that we hope that the UN agency be activated and work in all Syria areas in need. I don't understand, and we in SU cannot understand why after the 2139, after all this humanitarian crisis, all the work of UN agency is just in the regime-controlled area. 90% of the food assistance was in regime-controlled area in the time that more than 60% of persons in needs are in the opposition-controlled area. We hope to see the UN agency working more humanitarian and starting to do cross-border, or at least assist or support INGO to do cross-border. We in SU and a lot of INGO are working cross-border operation for more than 1.5 years, and some INGO from 2 years. And until now, we didn't see any assistance from UN. We have a high number of camps, refugee in border, in Syrian-Turkish border, and also in Syrian-Jordanian borders. So the border are totally controlled by Syrian opposition forces, and there's a huge number of INGO and national agency working in this area by cross-border. Thank you.
Thanks, and now I think we really have reached the end of the event, but I want to say that the panelists, we just barely touched on the tip of the iceberg of what they have to say, and we'll be just outside if you have other questions. I know we didn't get a chance to talk about Aleppo in detail or the question about children, but so if you just step outside and you want to follow up on the question, we'll be there. Thanks again, everyone, for coming.